Broadcasting from Hollywood, it's the official On Air with Brandon J podcast. Here we go.
Hey everyone, welcome to On Air with Brandon J. I'm Brandon. I'm joined by special guest today, Bayan Joonam, behind the hit docuseries on Vice TV. You know it as QAnon, The Search for Q. Bayan, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Brandon.
Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know season 2 just launched, and for all of those that don't know, we're living in America, right? But there's some that aren't living in America. What is QAnon?
Absolutely. So QAnon is a far-right conspiracy that grew out of 8chan, which is a message board on the internet. And we saw over the pandemic how it grew from being in these kind of anonymous message boards into mainstream politics. There were Congress people being elected who held and signaled that they supported QAnon. So my co-host Marley and I figured we should take a look at what it's all about.
How did you and Marley meet?
Oh man, that is a great story. We actually met at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., which is a think tank. And I was a producer at the time. I was helping them reshape their workflow to deliver daily content for YouTube. And Marley worked on the third floor as one of the comms team, somebody who was on the comms team. So we were regularly in touch, passing back and forth scripts and content ideas. And that's how we met in DC.
That is super cool. And, when I was watching the first season, I remember when you guys arrived in DC, and I think, and correct me if I'm not wrong, you guys were interviewing a motivational speaker. I think her name was Kelly, the blonde girl. I can't remember her full name. And, just seeing, how DC was all boarded up. I remember LA and the riots and everything. It was just crazy. What was your first thoughts as you guys witnessed what was going on in DC?
Yeah, I think, that was at this very unique time that we're all familiar with, where everybody was on lockdown. So a lot of streets were just empty. But suddenly, I think the summer of 2020, we saw a shift where activism became something that, on both sides of the political aisle, people were coming out and showing their support for what they believed in. And among that group, you started to see, the letter Q everywhere. Especially in Trump rallies, especially in rallies that focused on, Republican Party and the extreme contingent of that. And so going to DC in what was going to be the final weeks of the White House, of Trump's White House, and seeing the supporters who marshaled, you referred to Kelly, who was, someone we just met outside of the White House, who was just there, sign holding and showing support. And sure enough, what's estimated to be 10 to 15% of the country held similar beliefs to QAnon, which is there is a cabal of child sex trafficking elites who are secretly ruling the world and government. And, I think that type of ideology, you can really trace a genesis to things like QAnon for popularizing and having people focus, their attention on, and then proclaim that, Donald Trump is the Messiah. Donald Trump is the only solution to this, which is, when you get into that land of, I think, extremism in politics.
That's far from the truth. It takes a team, an army, and something I was going to ask you. Okay. So this is a brilliant, 4-part series that you guys put together. What are some of the questions that are going to arise here in season 2?
That's a great question because, Q disappeared for 18 months right after January 6th, right after the insurrection.
Right.
And so the question that we asked leading into this was, what happened to the 30 million plus Anons, the people who identified as supporters of Q, after Q disappeared, after they no longer had the anonymous digital prophet to rally around, who filled that vacuum? And so that was really the launch of, season 2 in this kind of post-insurrection world where most of these Anons, were kicked off of social media for posting Q-related content.
Well,
And
there's been a lot of speculation about a lot of things. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein, is he a part of this whole QAnon thing? And no, he's no longer with us. But after what happened with, Maxine and all of these different things, it's very interesting. It creates this curiosity, and I know you can probably relate. Like, okay, well, how did this start? Where did all these people go? There's this huge hashtag Save Our Children everywhere. If you've lived in Los Angeles like I have, you go up and down Sunset, you see these people carrying these huge banners, Save Our Children. It's got to be surreal.
Those are really the umbrellas that we look at, in season 2 as like this, more or less unified group under Q starts to factionalize around 3 main conspiracies. One of them, you noted, Save Our Children, which I want to note that there are actual child sex trafficking issues. You noted Jeffrey Epstein, which is an issue. And I think something that really ignited, there's always a grain of truth. Which a lot of these conspiracies are built, right? That it can be true that Epstein is a monster, but that doesn't make it true that there is some organized cabal of elite people who are controlling the weather and the world, right? There's like this leap that people who follow QAnon take from looking at something like Jeffrey Epstein, which was an atrocity, and then implying that therefore, Bill Gates is now a Satanist who participates in satanic rituals and has created this vaccine as a tool of genocide. You know what I'm saying? So you start to see how you take this grain of truth and you use people's, I think, inherent bias in a time when there is so much inequality, and especially along lines of economics and wealth. And then you're able to create this like villain of, elite people who most Americans don't really know. And then, from there, it kind of can cascade into a political movement that is based on those grievances. And that's what we really see in
movie years ago. What was it with starring Mel Gibson? Was it Conspiracy Theorist?
Oh, I don't know, but Mel Gibson movies are very popular with this crowd. So like
yeah,
The Patriot, the film The Patriot is a real, you see a lot of memes on these message boards referring to The Patriot, and especially that him grabbing the American flag and running through the British Army.
Crazy stuff, man. Crazy stuff. Yeah. Bayan, what are some of the new upcoming projects you and your production team are working on right now?
Oh, that's a fun question, actually. So one has to be announced, but it's going to be based in Atlanta, about a very popular club that was really at the center of hip hop and music culture over the last few decades in a way that, like, if you don't know, this documentary will make sure you know.
I think that club is talked about in a TV series, Buckhead Shores, Magic City. I'm going to try to pull it out. I mean, so, because personally, I grew up in my hometown of Columbia, South Carolina, and literally 3.5 hours away from Atlanta. And so many artists have been birthed out of ATL. And now Atlanta has turned into the new Hollywood, per se, as critics say, because like, the Coming Home to America film, the sequel was filmed at Tyler Perry's new studio that he built in Atlanta. So can you see Hollywood migrating to Atlanta more and more?
It's a good question, and I'm not a native to Atlanta. I'm learning as this project continues forward, and I have a deep connection to the music that has come out of Atlanta. So I'm really enjoying kind of reliving a lot of those moments through the music and learning about their genesis through this club. I really do, though, think that there is that energy of Hollywood. I think is always looking at different pockets of the country to emulate and elevate. And I think Atlanta's been a place that I think for a long time Hollywood has been pulling inspiration from and finding ways to, seduce artists to come over to the West Coast. And I think now what we're seeing is a shift in the music industry and the film industry at large, which empowers artists to really be their own business, be their own entrepreneur. And so I think you see in Atlanta and Georgia, largely speaking, a number of these studios, some like you mentioned, that are just making it very attractive to make stuff in Atlanta and in Georgia more broadly. And when I go there, I understand Southern hospitality is a real thing. I love Georgia. I love Atlanta.
And for all of those filmmakers out there, you slap that Georgia peach filmed in Georgia, and those tax credits just show up, and they're really what is the word? They're really easy to work with per se. They're more flexible. Let's just put it that way. So very cool. What is some advice you have, Bayan, for those aspiring filmmakers out there that really want to make a name for themselves?
Film everything. Just go out, and even if you don't have an idea that's solidified, I think oftentimes if you are waiting for like that permission or that moment where you feel prepared in the field of documentary, I think part of the beauty of it is actually the search for the story itself and bringing audiences along on that journey. And that's what people want now, especially where the fourth wall of media, the relationship between the filmmaker and the audience can be more centered and as part of the story. So find stories that are authentic to you, stories that only you could really tell, and just go and start filming it. I think QAnon is one of those interesting things that, like, it certainly wasn't a story that only I could tell, and there's been so many people to tell the story. But when I looked at the landscape of storytelling in that space, I didn't see a lot of content that really aimed at trying to genuinely understand what draws people to believe things that just on their face seem outlandish. And
you know what's interesting about that, and I have to add, you are so right on the money with that statement. Social media has influenced and impacted our perception of reality, and our attention spans have gone down the toilet with the phones, the smartphones, the iPhone, the Samsung Galaxies, things like that. But social media has created this pocket of perception, because like I just did an interview and I got so much hate mail via Twitter, right? And I'm not even really a fan of Twitter. I was one of the first people to join Twitter years ago, but I haven't really used it because I've found myself more engaging with my audience with Instagram and YouTube and Facebook and even TikTok. And it's just interesting to see how perception that picture of perception can be painted as a false narrative, right? On social media.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, social media has also trained us to kind of like look for the most outrageous thing and, elevate that thing. So I think, to that point, it's really about knowing that people also want more than what they're getting on like social media when it comes to those short bursts of outrage. People do like content that is a deep dive. I call it, shallow and broad, and then there's narrow and deep, right? And shallow and broad works, right? A lot of things that give you a primer. I think a lot of YouTube has that like utilitarian sense of like it's teaching you how to do this thing, and then you have this narrow and deep perspective that is more about like honing in on a specific thing. And like I think about that meme with like, Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where he's like got all the red things connected to like Carol, the post office person, or Carol who's missing from accounting. And I get a kick out of those type of investigations, right? Like I like going, 6 hours deep into one specific subject matter to try to learn about it. And so I think always understanding that human curiosity, or like our curiosity, comes down to like the emotional engagement that you can create in that process. And I think as a filmmaker, right, like who never really considered myself as like somebody on screen, I've been making films and stuff for 15 years. Never in that time did I actually think about hosting until Vice gave us the opportunity. And then I thought, cool, like how can I use this as a way for the audience to connect with my journey through this rabbit hole of conspiracy that is, you know, it's emotional at times, it's confrontational, it's hostile, it's outrageous, it's funny at times.
Right.
And I think you feel that through, you know, Marley and I experiencing it, you know, firsthand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And leading into what I'm going to let you guys know, Bayan and the wonderful folks at Vice have been awesome and courteous to allow us to air the trailer here on Air with Brandon J, to give you guys a sneak peek of QAnon, the search for Q. And
all new content. This is season 2 special, which is airing every Wednesday on Vice TV at 10 o'clock.
The story of QAnon.
You think Q will ever come back? Q what?
Isn't over.
The main name is Mike Flynn. I actually think he's an enemy to this country.
Do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified morally?
Take the stuff.
The conspiracy grows.
It's not a vaccine, it's a bioweapon.
The real search for answers.
Do you think America's heading towards a civil war?
I was in the Oval Office meeting. I know the whole story.
Is just beginning. QAnon, the search for Q.
all right, welcome back, guys. I hope you enjoyed the trailer. Bayan, you guys got some incredible footage and just genius in being able to document everything that you've seen. It really makes us question what is a reality and what isn't a reality. So this leads me into my next question. I was watching the podcast interview with Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience with Mark Zuckerberg, our faithful leader with Meta, formerly Facebook Inc. And my question is, do you think that we're going to reach a reality with Oculus and VR, right? To where these types of interviews are going to become null and void because we're going to have this need and this desire to do everything in the virtual reality world?
My personal opinion, yes. I do think that interviews like this, rather than happening through like a video chat, will be through a more immersive experience, because that's just how technology goes. Like, we want connection. We want the things that are hard to pick up through, you know, you don't know what's happening, like from the chest down. And you have that feeling, right, when you meet someone in person that you've been video calling for a year and you're like, wait a second, like, your height's different than I think. And it's
I'm a
interesting.
nervous wreck right now. I'm sweating. I'm trembling. I don't know what to ask you. No, I'm kidding. But I know.
No,
exactly
but it's like, it's interesting because I've definitely noticed that on set, especially, right? Is like, you've worked in a virtual setting and then you like meet them in person. And even though you've seen their face for the last 8-12 weeks, you're like, wow, it's like meeting you again for the first time. And I think what's interesting about like having an avatar that exists in a metaverse, they can look as much or as little like you as someone would desire, right? You could portray yourself or represent yourself as, you know, if you really like pandas, you could be a panda, right? Like, all of these options open up that almost make some of the more superficial ways that we create judgments about each other irrelevant, which I love that. I think that's actually like a positive, that can have a positive impact on society if we're interacting with each other based on more of our ideas and less about like the judgments we may make about each other's appearances. So I think in that sense, I do think that, yeah, it's inevitable technologically that we will normalize VR and metaverse-based interactions. And I think that we have to always remember to put people at the center of that. And ask ourselves, how is this actually making our lives better? And it's funny you ask, because I'm working on another project right now that does take a deep dive into the metaverse and dating in the metaverse. And it's incredible what's already possible. Already the ability to create a profound connection, even a love connection, we can do online through, today. And I think that's worth considering when we ask ourselves if the metaverse is going to happen. I think it's more of a question of, well, when?
When, right, absolutely. Could not say it any better. Bayan, if anyone wants to see all of these projects, right? We know QAnon, The Search for Q, season 2 is airing on Vice Media, but where can people go to see these new upcoming projects you're working on?
My Instagram, Bayan Joonam. You can follow me there. I like Instagram as a medium. I love sharing images of what I'm working on through the stories, just those little snippets of the behind the scenes moments as projects come together. So especially if you love filmmaking, the process of documentary filmmaking, and just want to see some cool people making great work, come on over to my Instagram page.
Very cool. Bayan, thank you so much for being a special guest today here on Air with Brandon J. Congrats on all of the success, right, with QAnon, The Search for Q. Congrats on the new projects. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do in the metaverse, and I'll see you in time very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Brandon.
Bayan Joonam, special guest here on Air with Brandon J. I'm Brandon. We'll see you next time. Goodbye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to On Air with Brandon J. Follow on Instagram at I am Brandon